Welcome back to another exciting episode of Table Talk with Community Heroes. I'm your host, Michael Taylor, and today we have this a education person that's been a long way, and her name is Wendy Hicks. Excited to be with her today. How are you doing today, Wendy Hicks?
I am doing well and I am honored to be here. So thank you, Michael.
All right. Could you tell us, Miss Wendy Hicks, about your home life growing up, or where are you from?
I am from Goldsboro. I grew up on Palm Street over near the Sunrise Shopping Center. And I've lived here my whole life except for the 4 years that I went away to college. And then I did a 6 month internship in Columbia, South Carolina after college. But then I came right back to Goldsboro.
Okay. What led you to the point that made you realize education field was the right direction for you?
Well, that's an interesting question, Michael, because when I went away to college, I knew that I wanted a job eventually helping others, but I had no idea what that would look like. And I loved art. Whenever I took a class as a child at the Arts Council when it was located on Lionel Street in Goldsboro, and when I used to go to the art class at Edgewood School, when I was young, Edgewood School was the school that I attended, and I did not have a disability at that time. It was a regular public school, so I attended that school, and we had an art room, and I just remember going into the art room and just being amazed at that you could learn about other people, other countries through the medium of art. So when I went off to college from Goldsboro High School, I went to East Carolina. I chose that university because I wanted to major in art. Now, Michael, what happened was I got there and I loved it. Absolutely loved my art classes, particularly art history. However, I kept receiving C's on my drawings and my paintings, and I was in and regional planning, and I was very drawn by art history into um, the design of historic buildings and historic preservation. So I majored in urban and regional planning, and my minor was sociology because I'm fascinated to learn about groups of people and how we all. I took the job out of college working for the Downtown Goldsboro Development Corporation, which was a nonprofit organization. And I worked as the executive director, believe it or not,
Mhm.
at the ripe old age of 23. And I stayed there for 4 years. And I learned more in that 4 years than I could have ever learned ever anywhere else. However, I will say this, I was young and beginning my family then. And that job was rigorous in that I worked for a board of directors, and I needed to attend all of the city council meetings and the historic district commission meetings and attend a lot of out of town meetings because at that time we just joined the Main Street program. And that was huge because that is we joined, well, we were selected by the state of North Carolina as a Main Street community. And I am just humbled that our downtown has continued to be, I think, one of the most developed, beautiful downtowns in North Carolina today. But back then, we were really struggling to get people to invest in downtown because at that time everybody wanted to go to the mall. But beginning a young family, a friend of mine called me and she said, Wendy, I'm at North Drive Elementary School as a kindergarten teacher. And she said, but next year I'm going to teach Spanish because the state of North Carolina has started the basic education program. And we're going to start offering Spanish in the elementary schools all the way K through 12. Would you be interested? Because I took a lot of Spanish classes in high school all the way through, and then I took Spanish in college, and I was fascinated by the language. And so I said, this would be a chance to really brush up on my Spanish skills, teach, which I knew would be helpful to others. And let's just be realistic, I would have my summers off and afternoons to be with my family. So all of this seemed like a win-win situation to me. Many people said, why would you do that? But in my heart, I knew that if I could just become a teacher, that I would learn. And you see, most teachers that I know love to learn. We are lifelong learners. And so I got the job, but I had to go back to school for about 26 semester hours to get the credentials to be a teacher. And that was very difficult. But I stayed at North Drive for 3 years. And then the school board cut, well, they didn't cut the program completely, but they modified the program. So I scrambled and I was like, I just got this certification, and my principal's saying that, the school board is looking at rearranging the program. So at that time, there were two school systems: Goldsboro City Schools and Wayne County Public Schools. And so I was working for Goldsboro City Schools, and I loved it. And I loved teaching at North Drive. Those were 3 of the best years of my teaching. But because I was afraid that I was going to lose my job, which I did, but I didn't, because I had ultimately at the end of that summer, I was invited to come back, but at a different school. Well, knowing that my future was a little uncertain, I applied at Wayne County Public Schools, and I became a teacher at Southern Wayne High School, and I stayed there for 7 years. Now, you talk about an education, that taught me so much. I loved that job. But teaching grammar and translation to Spanish 2 and 3 students, I would literally go home at night and study to learn what I was going to teach the next day. It grew me. It grew me. I mean, I never would have ever known that I could need to learn so much in such a short amount of time. But I did, and I loved it. And then one day, the teacher that taught beside me, we were both Spanish teachers, and she said, Wendy, our demographics are changing so much in Wayne County. Would you consider going with me to get your certification in English as a second language? And I said, no, too much paperwork. She said, I'm telling you, this is getting ready to explode. So we did it, and we took the class, and we took the praxis test, and we became certified English as a second language teachers. And at that time, the majority of the demographics were changing in the Spring Creek school district. So I went and I taught for 20 years English as a second language at Spring Creek School. And the first school was just it was K-8. Then they added a high school, and I went with the elementary. So that's how I finished my career, was teaching English as a second language to students whose first language was something other than English. So I taught students from China, students from Yemen, students from Mexico, students from Honduras, students from the Philippines, students from Guatemala, El Salvador, Puerto Rico, different areas. And I loved every single second of it. So I feel like that I was just directed. I've met some of the best people in the whole world through the Wayne County Public School system. And eventually the Goldsboro City Schools and the Wayne County schools merged and became one school system.
Wow, that is quite a journey. My next leading question, Wendy, is about your time in the Goldsboro Development Corporation. Could you Can you tell us a little bit about the years as an executive director when you were there?
Yes, I will. Oh my goodness, it was wonderful. Well, essentially, it was a small nonprofit organization back then. There is still, I think, a nonprofit organization within it, but it is actually a department of the city of Goldsboro now. Um, but back then, it was simply a very small nonprofit organization. And when I tell you that the president of the board of directors gave me the key and said, "Good luck," I'm telling you the truth. And one of the city planners that worked for the city, his name was Jeff Young, and I'll never forget. He called me one day and he said, "Wendy, we applied." He said, "Actually, the former director before you applied to become a Main Street community, and we were not selected." Now, it wasn't because the application was not a good application. It was simply because the program was new and the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources only selected, I believe, it was 10 cities every other year. And then the program was brand new. So he said the application process is coming up soon. And this was my very first year there. So he said, "I have a copy of the application and we can just tweak it and resubmit it." He said, "And I would encourage you to do that because if we are selected as a Main Street community, then the state of North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources is going to come in and help us with many things, including design, economic restructuring, um, all kinds of, there were 4 major areas that they come in and help you. They even hired an architect that would come in and redesign the facades for the owners of the buildings at no cost, to go back to like take away the big aluminum facades and go back to the original beautiful turn of the century, turn of the 20th century building as it was. Because many of these storefronts we see now during the 70s and 80s were complete, well, 60s and 70s were completely covered up with aluminum and a new storefront because it needed to look more modern. It was in competition with these big shopping malls, that were being developed. And so he helped me, and we applied, and Goldsboro was selected as one of the 5 communities. And so we received intense support. And the North Carolina Main Street program, to my knowledge, still works with the city of Goldsboro in these 4 areas. I just can't remember what they all were because I'm a little bit put on the spot. As I know one was design, one was economic restructuring, one was promotion, and the other was, that escapes me. But anyways, that they really focused in on that and brought people and expertise and all kinds of things. And because of that, I think it really, it really gave the Downtown Goldsboro Development Corporation the boost that it needed to eventually continue and become actually a department within the city of Goldsboro government. So it was, back in those days, I would, with the architect from the state, and we would literally knock on doors and say, "Would you like a drawing of what your building actually looks like underneath that aluminum?" And then we created a facade incentive grant program where if the owner said, "Okay, I'll take this and I'll do this," I think back then we would match up to $1,000 or something, and to give them the economic stimulus to go ahead and restore their building back to what it was originally. And most of the buildings downtown Goldsboro right now are back to their original beautiful original state, because most people over the last 30 years have indeed, most owners of buildings and businesses have indeed pulled down those big aluminum facades and have restored their buildings. And our downtown buildings are absolutely gorgeous. And then, um, I was not part of, I was only there 4 years, so I was not part of the larger process of the whole downtown redevelopment. But that has been a beautiful, beautiful process to watch. But for me personally, I loved every minute of it. I just knew in my heart that I wanted to teach. My grandmother was not a certified teacher, but she taught. And so I just, as much as I love working with the aesthetics of the downtown and meeting the people, there's there's just nothing like teaching students and learning from the students.
Oh, well, that's very inspiring because even for us as a nonprofit and community heroes, so I'm just glad to hear a story that kind of gives us that extra boost. My next question, could you tell us about your early years as a Spanish teacher?
Oh yes. So at North Drive, this was so beautiful. We would go into the classrooms. At that time, North Drive was a K-1 school. And we would go into the classrooms for 15 minutes a day. When I say we, there were two Spanish teachers. And we would go in for 15 minutes a day and we would teach the students Spanish. And it was as if they could just absorb it because their minds did not tell them this is going to be too difficult. And typically, with brain function, people have learned now that to actually acquire a language, it is best to begin before the age of 12 because there's a difference with acquisition versus learning. I did not start learning Spanish until I was in the ninth grade at Goldsboro High School. So I was already 13 or 14. So I've learned Spanish, but I can't say that I've acquired the language like a native speaker. I have not. So our goal was to go in while the children are young and they loved it and they were not afraid of it. Sadly, that program doesn't exist anymore, but I sure do wish that it did because in other countries, people begin learning English in kindergarten and first grade and they continue to learn all the way through. And so I met a student recently, a young woman from Cameroon, and in her country, she is offered, her first language was French, but she was offered to either learn German or I can't remember the other one, and English. And I remember German because that was her selection. So now she speaks French, English, and German. And so because she started at a young age. So I do wish that our country would begin to see the value of a bilingual education for all students, all students.
Absolutely, I agree with that 100%. Um, Tell us a little, Wendy, about your years teaching Spring Creek Elementary School.
Well, I loved it. I just loved it. These students were from other countries, or their parents were from other countries, and they would be newcomers into a new school in which a different language other than the language that they spoke and knew was being spoken all around them. And it's really, I think, overwhelming to just have to be immersed. For for real acquisition to occur for a language, it's best to have scaffolded English mixed in with the immersion. For example, to learn to swim, it's not best just to be thrown into the deep end of the pool. It is best to learn, have some swimming lessons before that are scaffolding in your knowledge at the same time that you're being pushed into the swimming pool. So we taught intense units that were aligned with the curriculum for each grade level. Now, for example, what kindergartners had in their standard course of study was the same type of language that we tried to use that academic language to teach the students. By the time they went to first grade, we would look at their standard course of study and try to integrate the academic language that is appropriate that they are learning in their classroom. And then by second grade and third grade, we did the same thing. For example, for many years, third grade was the year where students learned about desert life. So we would incorporate, when they were in the third grade, a nonfiction science article about the desert that had the basic English academic words that a student may not know. For example, I would point to, in a science article, a picture of a cactus, and the student who appears to be completely bilingual because they have basic interpersonal communicative skills, they call that BICS, but they don't have the cognitive academic linguistic proficiency, which is called CALP. So you would, a teacher could say, okay, what is this? And point to a cactus. And the student could say, that is the green thing that has the, oh, you don't want to touch that. But they might be missing the word cactus. And so we would teach the cognitive academic linguistic words and phrases for the units that were being taught, not necessarily at the same time, but within the same grade level. They might, learn one thing in September in their ESL class, but the classroom may not get to it until the spring, or vice versa. So, and then we would also do some type of fiction with that same unit. So we did thematic units, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And it typically takes any human being 5 to 7 years to learn a new language. And so that's very, very important when we think about the fact that students are being given an end of course test or end of grade test in their subject areas, usually 1 to 2 years after they have begun school. And so we know that these students are taking a test in a language that they have not gained proficiency yet, just as I have studied Spanish since I was in the 9th grade, and I'm still not what I would call 100% proficient, because I have BICS. I have my basic interpersonal communicative skills, but there's still a lot of CALP that I don't have, the cognitive academic linguistic proficiency. And the same is true in English for me. I can read a medical journal right now out loud to you in English, and I have no idea what it says because I'm not a doctor.
Oh,
I don't have the academic linguistic proficiency. And so when someone is learning a second language, I don't think that consideration or education has explained enough how difficult that is. And my hat is off to anyone who learns a second language. And so that is why I would love to see a dual language immersion school, for all of our schools to be dual language immersion schools. Now, I know that's pie in the sky. Some exist in other communities. I do know that in some of the public schools here in Wayne County, a few have started a kindergarten program that are dual language. I would love to see that take off and become our norm. But I do think we have a ways to go. There's a tremendous amount of education that needs to be shared. And that's my passion. So I don't know if that's answered sufficiently, but that's pretty much some of my thoughts on that.
It's quite a journey, and I appreciate you sharing that because I I know through college I wanted to know the difference between the typical education and then the knowledge. And you definitely explained that the knowledge is very much important as just as well as the education. Once you get the education, then you have to get the knowledge so you can become more proficient. So you really have broken that down. It shows how much of a professional you are.
Well,
Not passion, but you're a professional first. That's the way I always call that. A person, they're passionate about it, but they're a professional first. And you explain that down to a T.
oh, well, thank you. I didn't realize that, but thank you.
Yeah, you did. Wendy, you taught English as a second language for over 20 years, and in those years, anything you believe have changed in your opinion in the education world, just in public schools?
I do. I've seen um, more tolerance, more acceptance, and I've seen people rise to the occasion of welcoming immigrants. I've seen people evolve to become more open and accepting. Unfortunately, I've also seen other attitudes displayed. Um, and from my perspective, I've seen teachers come to the rescue and to the needs of students. And I've seen lots of beautiful, beautiful stories. And I'm going to tell you that our public school teachers really are heroes. They are heroes. I worked with heroes who helped shape me. And I just, my heart breaks when I see what has been expected sometimes of teachers. And yet, when the teacher does rise to that expectation, and the teacher does, right now, what our teachers are doing during this pandemic is inexplicable. They are heroes. But I don't think that many people really realize it because they're also very humble and they're not looking for accolades. So, teaching English as a second language for me has taught me the beautiful cultures of others, and it has shown me how people here in the United States can show true love and acceptance. And the two things are very beautiful.
Well, Wendy, is there any advice you would like to give a young, inspiring student today?
Oh, yes. Meet people that are different than you. Meet people who speak a different language than you do. Travel, go places. It Get out of your comfort zone. It's okay, you can come back, but open up the world and watch it expand. And just get out there. And it doesn't have to be traveling far. It doesn't mean you have to go way around the world. You can, but just travel. Just meet others. They're right here with us.
Oh, wow. Is there any social media or website you would like to share with our audience today?
Oh, wow, that catches me off guard. Um, well, I'm a member of Women of Welcome, which is a group of women on Facebook. Um, Anyone can go to their website, Women of Welcome.
Okay.
Um, I would also say to keep up with world events. NPR.org does a great job of expanding the world for others, for me. So that would be what I would recommend.
Well, thank you for meeting with us on Community Heroes. This concludes this episode. And for those who would like to follow us on our social media, you can follow us on Facebook and you can follow us on Instagram, com_heroes, and Twitter, com_heroes, YouTube, heroes, and also we have a website, www.communityheroes.net. And if anyone would like more content like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next episode.